Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to today's Saturday's bonus upload. Gets us a little closer to tonight's Saturday Nightmares, live from New York, 12 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I do hope to see you all there. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click the like button. It takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. They are appreciated and they do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's bonus, shall we? Today's first encounter. Back when I was younger, we lived in Minnesota. When I was old enough and big enough, my brother finally decided that I was able to go hunting with him. I had waited a long while to be able to do this and was really looking forward to it. He was over 6'5", several years older than myself, and had spent a ton of time out in the woods. To me, he was a giant and someone who knew his way around the woods better than anyone else. It was a thick forest, and we had gone a good distance along a stretch he was familiar with, just to get me properly introduced on my first trip. After a while, we had gotten into a clearing, but we stopped because he said he felt like we were being watched. Something had eyes on him. And he had been out there doing this long enough to know that feeling, and to have that instinct that something was wrong. Maybe it was only because he said that, but I also started to feel like something was out there, and had eyes on me as well. It was not a good feeling at all. He was listening and looking around quietly. I kept looking around as well, but didn't know what to look for. I didn't know what to listen for either. It was dead silent all around. Everything was so still, the only thing I could hear was my own breath. Without nothing else to hear, I remember worrying that I was making too much noise by breathing too loud, and that I would attract too much attention because of that. I tried to slow it down, and even tried to hold my breath at times, thinking I would make less noise and hear the surroundings better. Other than that, I became very aware of my heart beating fast, but that was the only other thing. I didn't see or hear anything. I would also look at my brother from time to time to see where he was looking at in that moment, just in case he had seen something. I was trying to pick up on his clues and probably ended up looking at him almost as much as I was looking at the surrounding area. During one of these times, I turned to look at him. I saw him make a sudden jerking motion with his shoulders and head, as if something suddenly caught his eye. He then fixed his gaze on a tree line across the clearing, in the direction we were heading before we stopped, but in an area that would have been to our right from where we had entered the tree line if we kept going. I immediately turned to follow his gaze so that I could also see what he was looking at. I didn't see anything at first, but then something moving through the trees caught my eye. It looked like it was the only thing moving. If it didn't move, it would have been perfectly hidden, and I wouldn't have seen it. I was looking in its direction, and it was still about 30 or so yards away, but, as I said, it would have been completely invisible to me if it didn't move. There was definitely something there, but While it was there in the tree line, it was hard to see or recognize exactly what it was. Suddenly, my brother pulled me behind him and stood between me and the part of the tree line we were looking at. He told me to stay behind him, but I moved a little in order to look around his side over to the trees again. I finally saw what was causing this whole situation for us. There was this huge creature standing between the two trees near the edge of the tree line. It was standing on two legs, with its lower body hidden by the brush. From that distance, it still looked very tall, maybe 7.5 feet. It was huge, and it looked very strong. I don't really know what it was, but it did not look like a bear. In fact, I know it wasn't a bear. When a large bear stands up, it still kind of looks bulky. This animal I saw looked more like an enormous bodybuilder, not bulky at all, but with a powerful build. It was brown with kind of a reddish-brown look to it, and the color made it harder to see it earlier since it helped hide it so well in the environment we were in. It didn't have normal forelegs like you would accept for an animal. Instead, its forelegs were very long, muscular arms like a person, but too long. It had its mouth open, and its large teeth were visible. It had a snout, but again, it wasn't a bear. Its head looked a lot more like a wolf's head in appearance, and it had long ears that were pointed up. I was all caught up in looking at it, but then it started walking toward us. I noticed movement from the corner of my eye as my brother immediately raised his rifle and took aim. As soon as he did that, the animal instantly moved back and ducked down into the brush. My brother fired a warning shot. It immediately got up on two legs again and sprinted behind the nearest tree. It waited a moment, then ran behind another tree at breakneck speed. Then it waited again before we suddenly saw it run behind another tree, where it ducked down into the brush there. It stayed on two legs the entire time it moved from tree to tree until it ducked down behind the brush that was around the last tree when it went behind. My brother was following its movements, but it ran too fast for him to take a proper shot at it. We didn't see it move anywhere anymore, and weren't sure if it was still around that same tree or if it had already moved away from that tree while being hidden by the brush. Brother suddenly telling me to start backing away. I did. Then he also started to back up. Well, he kept his aim on where we last saw it. As we went back, he made sure he was between me and where we last saw that animal, or where it could have been. He said that all the trees it moved behind were still near the edge of the tree line, and that it was not running away. Each tree it ran behind was closer to us than the last. It was repositioning itself. When we almost got out of the clearing, my brother saw it again. It was standing behind and looking around the side of the tree that was closest to where we were earlier when we first saw it. If we didn't see it before and kept going, we would have passed right by that tree it was now standing behind. It didn't enter the clearing while we were still crossing it, but the animal had come as close as it could to us while staying behind that tree line. Once we got out of the clearing and back into the trees we passed through earlier, back in the direction we had come from, my brother had picked up his pace. Everything was dead silent while we were going back, even though the same area was full of noise when we passed through earlier. My brother was sure we were being followed. We couldn't see the creature anymore, and didn't know where it may be. But we made it quickly back to the truck, and as carefully as we could. When we were talking about it later, my brother told me that he had never seen an animal like that before. It was the first time in a very long time that he could recall feeling fear about being out in the woods. He was also much more worried than he would have been because I was there as well. Predators will go after smaller prey, and what we saw was definitely a predator. He said it moved so fast that he wasn't sure he could have shot it in time. For my first hunt, I found the whole experience to be horrifying. I waited so long to be able to go hunting, but after that experience, I never tried to go back hunting again. It was almost something that played a part in my decision to eventually leave Minnesota later on, when I could. My brother didn't want to go hunting again for a while after that. It took him a long time to be okay with even an idea of going back out into the woods again. Eventually, when he did go the next time, it was to a completely different area. As for that particular area, he never went back there again. Today's second encounter. What happened to me happened a long time ago near the central part of Bangladesh. It was late in the night and I was walking home when this happened. I was living in a village in the countryside at the time, and so was a relative who was holding a celebration. I was coming back to my home from the celebration at the home of the relative. On the way, I noticed two bright red lights from far away that were getting bigger and bigger. I saw that they were coming closer to me. They came close and stopped, maybe 10 steps in front of me. Eyes, those red lights were eyes. They were the eyes of the most hideous, horrible, and misshapen donkey. It was giving the same smell as meat that was rotten. Its legs and body were looking as if they were twisted. It didn't look as if it should still be able to run and move when it was in that condition it was in. One of its ears was looking as if it was covered in blood, as if somebody cut it half, maybe by accident. Its face was twisted in such angerness, its body also looking covered completely in wounds that were bleeding. Its mouth was open, and it was snapping it so much. It was looking very much as if it was trying to bite something. It looked very much as if it was a real physical donkey, as if it was flesh and blood, but I knew that it was not. I knew it was a spirit, not a flesh and blood animal, and I knew it was evil. It ran all the way to me without making any kind of noise. If I didn't see it, I would not know it was there because of how noiseless it was. I was standing on the main public road and it was blocking the way in front of me. It was looking at me in so much angerness, and I did not see how I could get around it. It was lifting up a leg and putting it down. It continued to move its legs in that way, up and down, up and down. Then it lowered its leg and its head, and it ran at me. There was private property all around on both sides of the road. Very quickly, I ran to the nearby private property from the road. The donkey chased me all the way to the edge of the road, but it didn't come closer from there. Instead, it was just stomping its hooves in anger at the edge of the road. The whole time that it was doing this, it didn't make a noise. In the village where I grew up, it was known that there were many evil spirits already in the world, and that evil spirits in the world can go to the places that are open to everybody. That means that evil spirits can go on public roads that are available to everybody, but they cannot go on private land unless they have been given permission to do so. They have to be allowed to do it by somebody on the land. Another way is if somebody moved onto the land and they did not know already that the evil spirit was connected to them. What I am saying is that an evil spirit cannot go on private land of someone without some kind of direct or indirect permission being given to it. That is what I was raised to know. Everybody that was living in my village also knew this as well. I was not going to go back out onto the road with it standing there. The only choice for me was to keep going in the direction of my home, but by staying on the private property of people who were living there, and by going from one private property to the next. It followed me the whole time, but it was staying on the main public road. There were many times when there were gaps between the private properties because another public road was crossing between the properties. Those times were distressing to me the most. Whenever I came to those, I had to run for my life over the crossing public road to the next private property. I had to run in that way because that evil spirit started to run very quickly to me from the main public road, down the crossing public road. It was almost possible for it to catch up to me some of those times. Those public roads were causing the gaps between the properties, and they were the worst thing for me. They were making my going back to my house take a very long time. Some of those times the evil spirit ran in front of me to go ahead to where there was a gap, and it started to wait in that gap ahead of me. Those times that it did that, the only choice for me was to go back in the opposite way. That made it come out of the gap and go back to the main road, so that it was able to come closer to where I was, but by it staying only on the public road all that time. When it was too far from the gap I was needing to cross, I started to run for my life back to the gap, to cross it to the next one of the private properties before the evil spirit was able to catch up with me. Almost all of those times I had to do that, it almost caught up to me. It was very much truthfully a life and death race against it, but I think it was having fun with itself. It was trying to make me suffer so much because the suffering of people is one thing that gives it happiness. It was a situation that was bringing me so much distress. It was also making me tired from so much running. I was becoming so tired, and I was outside of my home for so much time that the sun was starting to come up. As soon as the sun came up, the creature was gone. I did not know in that moment that it was gone because I was standing with my hands on my knees and my head was down because I was trying to catch my breath. When I looked to where I saw it for the final time, it was already gone without any trace. There was no sign to indicate to me where it was or where it went. But I waited for some time and I looked around in all directions to have certainty that it was gone. I was so many hours late and I was tired from so much running, but it did not come back anymore. That night was terrible for me, but I was able to get back home in safety. Today's third encounter. My experience happened on a day I was traveling the interstate. It was 1988, and I was driving through Tennessee at the time, taking what I thought would be a shortcut through a rural area and possibly through a more scenic route through the state. Unfortunately, along the way, the rear tire on the left side of my car blew out while I was basically in the middle of nowhere. That was the time before cell phones. It wouldn't have been possible to call for help. Not in the way cell phones make it so easy now, but I was prepared. I knew how to change a tire myself, and I had a spare, so I started to work on it. After some time, I finished changing the tire. I was still on the ground and didn't have a chance to put all of the tools away yet, when I heard a lot of strange and rapid noises on the road some way back on the part of the road I drove through earlier. After the tire blew out, and while I was still stopping the car, I turned my head just in time to see something large disappear into the trees off to the side of the road. It was completely unexpected to see something that large, and I wasn't sure what it was because I mostly missed seeing it in time. With the way it ran so fast, if I didn't look in the direction of those noises when I did, I might have missed the whole thing. Even though it was already gone, I kept looking over in that direction, somewhat out of curiosity, but also out of a sense of caution, because it had been dead silent all that time, and then something large suddenly made noises by running across the road like that. There was no one and nothing else around, so it was a little unsettling. I kept looking there just in case I'd see anything, but also to make sure I was not in any danger. I didn't know what it was, but I started wondering why it would have been running so fast in the first place. Almost as soon as I started to wonder about it, I froze up immediately because I saw the reason for it. A huge black dog came running out of the woods. It was enormous for a dog and running in the same direction the earlier creature ran, as if it was hunting or chasing after whatever the earlier one was. Even on all four legs, the size of this dog was rather considerable, given the distance I saw it from. At first, it kept going without missing a step. It moved fast, but then it seemed to notice that I was there, and I saw it do something that immediately made me concerned. While it was running, it turned its head toward me and started to look at me. After seeing me, it never turned its head away from me. It had almost reached the trees the earlier creature ran into, but it slowed down instead and came to a complete stop, all the while still looking at me. Then it turned its entire body around in my direction to face me. I was scared to see it do that and didn't move an inch. This creature stayed where it was, staring at me, and I kept looking back at it, still not moving a muscle. It's like I was thinking it would leave me alone if I didn't move, even though on some level I was keenly aware of the fact the whole reason it even stopped running in the first place was because it noticed that I was there. That still didn't prevent me from hoping it would just go away and would leave me alone eventually. Unfortunately, that's not how things played out. It waited a second or two and then started to move toward me. That made me panic. I stood up immediately as soon as it saw me do that. It stopped moving. It continued to stare at me and waited a second or two, then stood on its hind legs. That was obviously horrifying to see because of how tall this thing looked. I was stunned, and I was feeling a whole new level of fear. I didn't have a chance to put the tools away, but I had already finished changing the tire before the creature came out of the woods. The car was right there, so I could have just moved back slowly to the driver's side, gotten into the car. The problem with that was that I was mostly too scared to even move slowly. After seeing it stand up, I was too scared to move at all. The whole thing was completely unexpected, and the creature ahead of me had my full attention. It was still standing on its hind legs, but then I saw it take a step toward me, and another, and then it started to charge at me. I can't begin to express the full extent of fear I had felt on seeing it charge at me, or the sadness I felt at that brief and sudden thought that I might die right then and there. It had no intention of leaving me alone at all. It was coming to get me. All its steps were large, with the distance it crossed with just one step and how fast it was moving. I thought it would reach me before I could even get back into the car, but that was the only thing I could try to do if I wanted to stay alive. I didn't have any weapons or any other way to defend myself against this creature. I had a passing thought where it occurred to me to try grabbing one of the tools I had just used to change the tire, but I didn't think any of those tools would help me much or be any use at all against this thing. I also knew I wouldn't have time to put the tools away, and I had to abandon them on the side of the road. While I scrambled to get back into the driver's seat, it was the worst thing that was happening. The creature was closing the gap between itself and me rapidly. It moved so fast, and I ran rushing to get into the car. I opened the door, got in, started the car, and drove off as fast as I could. I looked for the creature to see where it was and realized it was running right beside my car, along the left rear side, and almost in my blind spot. I was still accelerating and gaining speed, but it was able to run alongside my car. It was still running on two legs all this time, and it towered over my car as it did so. It was extremely tall and looked very formidable. I thought it was an enormous dog earlier, but when it was that close, I could see that only its head and lower body made it look like a dog. Like its upper body was more like a human's, but very brawny and heavily muscled. Its upper body was also bigger than a human's would be, with longer arms. It ran up near my window, but then it moved several feet away. That made it possible for me to see its face. If it was running right outside of my door, I would have had to shift my seat and strain to look up at its face. But I was able to see its face because it moved away like that and looked at me while it was running. I looked up at its face, but I wish I had not done so, because it was looking right at me and I ended up looking right into its eyes. All of its fangs and teeth were bared and its face was furious, but the worst part was looking into this creature's eyes. There was so much fury in them. It was absolutely horrifying to look into those eyes. I had the clear and unmistakable understanding that it had no intention whatsoever of letting me escape. If anything had happened differently earlier, not being able to change the tire in time, not getting in my car in time, not knowing how to change a tire in the first place, or not having a spare, or any such similar thing that would have caused a delay, or that would have caused me to get stuck back on that road, then it would have caught me and killed me. That's what I saw, what I knew to be absolutely true when I looked into those eyes. It ran alongside my car the entire time I was accelerating. My only hope was to speed up enough. I crossed 40, then 50, then 60 miles an hour and kept going, but it showed no signs of slowing down. I kept accelerating the whole time and would look back and forth from the road to the creature to make sure that I stayed on the road and to see if it was slowing down at all. It did not seem to be slowing down. It kept running alongside my car. Almost every time I looked at it, I would either see it already looking at me, or I would see it turn to look at me with all of its fangs and teeth on display, with those eyes just filled with rage. Things continued in this way, but then it unexpectedly turned and ran off into some trees off to the side of the road, closer to where it was. I don't know why, but I looked ahead of me again and saw that some vehicles were now visible and approaching from the distance on the opposite side of the road. I didn't know if it was related to the other people being there and approaching, even if they were in their vehicles, or if it was because the trees it ran off into were the last ones visibly close to the road for a while. Since I first saw that creature up until the point it ran off, I had been driving through an area with trees close to both sides of the road, but now I was about to drive into a part of the road where the lines of trees in both directions moved farther out and away from the road. Regardless of what the actual reason was, that was the last time I saw that creature. Many years since then to reflect on what happened that day. In the beginning, it wasn't possible to even think about it without being overwhelmed with terror by the mere memory of it. I needed a lot of time to come to terms with the experience. That still hasn't happened fully, but after enough time has passed, I did start finding it possible to think about what happened to me in some depth and with some degree of control over the terror I would feel every time I thought about this creature. When it stood up on its hind legs, back at that time, the creature was the scariest thing in the world, especially at the moment that I saw it take steps toward me on its hind legs. If I hesitated or delayed getting back into my car, I think I wouldn't have had a chance of getting away from it and getting back into my car in time. If I had fumbled the keys when I was inside, or if the car didn't start for any reason, Then, considering how strong it looked, it could have possibly torn the door right off the car and pulled me out. I've thought a lot about it regarding why it would have gotten up onto 2 legs. It's true that it was originally running on 4, but then it went out of its way to stand up on 2 when it came after me, and it stayed on 2 the rest of the time it was chasing me. It seems that it could have just come after me on all 4 instead of taking the time to stand up and then charging at me on the hind legs. This creature or beast without a doubt was a predator, and maybe it stood up to appear even more intimidating, especially after it saw me stand up. When I was on the ground by my car, it was still on 4 legs. It looked like it would have been taller than me. My standing up may have appeared to change that, and it may have thought I was showing hostility or challenging it. It then showed itself to be much taller than me in reality by standing up on its hind legs at that point. In fact, it looked like it would have been several feet taller than anyone I've ever met. I say this even taking into account the fact that things look smaller when far away. So it had to be considerably tall to stand up as high as it did, even at the distance I saw it from. I also think the creature may have been familiar with people to some extent. It might have known exactly what kind of effect it would have had on me if I saw it stand up first, before it proceeded to come after me on its hind legs. It was scary enough seeing such a huge dog, but it was horrifying to see it stand up and start charging at me on 2, with it being tall enough to tower over me, and with it looking as formidable as it did. It's also possible that it saw I was outside of my car, so it may have understood that it would have had to use its hands at some point if it caught up to me while I was still in my car, but before I was able to start driving away. That could be likely reason, and that could also mean it was familiar both with people and with the way we get in our cars. Even ordinary animals can recognize as such, though, for the most part, ordinary animals are usually unable to easily do something as simple as open a car door to follow people in, without the use of hands. I'm aware that some animals can be trained to open car doors, while other animals, including wild bear, can figure out on their own how to do it. But it's still much easier to do with hands. In that case, standing up when it did might have been more efficient because, after all, it had human-like upper body, including arms and what looked like hands, and it could run very fast, whether on 4 legs or 2, faster than any human could run for certain. But it would need its hands to open the door if it was able to get me before I was able to drive away. If that really was the reason, then that also implies it would have been familiar enough with people to have predicted what I would do. That, to me, could mean that it had gone after someone else before, someone who was in a car. That's a horrible thing to consider, and it wouldn't surprise me if that turned out to be the case, because I am entirely convinced that it had no intention of letting me leave that place alive. For many years it was not possible or easy to even think about what happened. The whole ordeal effectively turned me into a nervous wreck for a long time. Nightmares of the creature continued for me every night since that experience, although they've reduced both in intensity and frequency over the years. For the longest time, I avoided the rural roads and the countryside in general of any state that I was required to travel through. I also became deathly afraid of dogs, especially larger ones, or any kind that could even vaguely resemble or reminded me of the general shape of the creature I saw, or of the way it looked when it was still running on 4 legs, then turned its head to look at me. I would be unable to watch scenes in movies or on TV of any dogs or wolves running, showing aggression, or showing their fangs. Another effect was that getting my children a pet dog wasn't something I was ever found possible to do. These effects have lessened significantly since, but even today I avoid dogs as much as possible. I'll even keep a distance from people who are out walking dogs. I try in general to avoid being physically close enough to dogs when I can, without exception. I won't look into the eyes of any dog. I've never had any idea that an enormous dog-like creature existed. That one I saw ended up making that become the most horrifying and traumatic experience of my life. It was one thing to see stand up and start charging me, but that wasn't the worst part of it. The worst part was looking at its face and then looking into its eyes closer up and knowing how close I had come to being killed. When I looked into those eyes, I knew in that moment with absolute certainty that it had no intention whatsoever of letting me leave there alive. And there you have it, folks, today's bonus. I do hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. After all, it is your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone's treated with the respect that we all deserve, so thank you. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real, they are out there, and they are dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.